Okay, the topic for today is exponential functions, and specifically, we're going to talk about how we graph an exponential function. First, we have to talk about what an exponential function is, and that's right here in the gray box. It can be in the form y equals b to the x power, in which b is just a number, okay? Or f of x equals b to the x power. And remember, b is just a number. And so it's an exponential function because the variable x is the exponent. Now, when we talk about an exponential function, first of all, the b has to be greater than 0. All right? And not equal to 1. If b is equal to 1, I'm going to show you what ends up happening with this, but it's just a straight line. So we have b has to be greater than 0. So in other words, positive. And I've got an example of one here that we're going to look at. And so the way that you go about graphing is the way you can go about graphing any type of function you have. And that is plug in some values for x, figure out the values for y, and then plot those points. All right? So I've got these x values, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And I'm figuring out f of x or y, because it can be either one, equals 2 to the x power. So in this case, my b is 2. So here, 2 to the -1 power is 1/2. So I have the point -1, +1/2. And that point is right here. If I plug in 0, I've got y equals 2 to the 0 power, which is 1. So 0, 1 is a point. All right, now I have x equals 1. So y equals 2 to the 1 power, which is 2. That's here, so 1, 2. And if I plug in 2, I've got y equals 2 squared, which is 4. So I have the point 2, 4. And so you can see I've got this curve. This is a graph of an exponential function. Now, all exponential functions, and that means functions with different b's, all look relatively similar. All right? Here's some things that are true. No matter what your b is, at 0, when you plug in 0, you're going to have b to the 0 power. It's always going to equal 1. So your y-intercept is always, y-intercept is always 0, 1. It's always going to be 0, 1. Unless you've got other stuff in your function. All right? So that's where it always crosses. So here's the thing. What can change this is translations. And we did these when we did the absolute value functions. They are at the bottom of the page. So if I add a number, c, onto the end, this is going to shift the graph up c units. If I subtract a number c at the end, it's going to shift the graph down c units. If I have the plus c with the x, it's going to shift it c units to the left. And if I have minus c with the x, it's going to shift it c units to the right. Finally, if I have a negative x as my exponent, it's going to reflect the graph across the y-axis. All right, so it's going to flip it from left to right. So what we're going to do on the next page is graph. All right, so the way that I'm going to start here, I've got y equals 3 to the x power, and then y equals 3 to the x plus 2 power. We're only going to figure out points for y equals 3 to the x, and then we're going to shift it based on the transformations. So I'm going to make a little table with x's, and then y equals 3 to the x power. So if x is -1, y equals 3 to the negative 1 power, which is 1/3. So when I graph this, I'm going to go to the point negative 1, 1/3, and that's right about there. If I put in 0, I've got 3 to the 0 power, which is 1. So the point 0, 1. And remember I said it was always going to cross right here. If I put in 1, I get y equals 3 to the 1 power, which is 3. All right, so 1/3. And if I put in 2, I've got y equals 3 squared, which is 9. That's actually off of our graph here. So now you can see how fast this is shooting upwards. All right? So here's where our graph goes. When you go to the left, it's getting really, really close to 0. But it's not going to cross. And it's going to go up this way. Because let's put in negative 2. This is 3 to the negative 2 power, which is 1 over 3 squared, which is 1/9. So see how as you go to the left, these will become fractions that are smaller and smaller and smaller. All right, the next graph we're going to do is y equals 3 to the x plus 2 power. So here's what I'm going to do. Go back to the transformations, and I have x plus c. This is going to shift the graph c units to the left. So that's what's going to happen. So I've got a new color now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the points that are on here and shift them 2 to the left. So I've got a point here, here, and here. I shifted everything 2 to the left. So when I graph this, it's going to go up like that. And this one is y equals 3 to the x plus 2 power. This one is y equals 3 to the x power. So see how we just shifted it? So let's go ahead and we'll do another example of graphing. All right, so I've got y equals 1/2 x. And this is going to be interesting for us because this is going to look a little bit different if the b is between 0 and 1. So if it's a fraction between 0 and 1. So here I'm going to write this. b, it's greater than 0, but less than 1. This is going to look a little different. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to plot some points. So I'm going to make a table with x and with y equals 1/2 to the x power. All right, so I'm going to put in negative 1, and that's going to give me 1/2 to the negative 1 power, which is 2. If I put in 0, I'm going to have 1/2 to the 0 power, and that is, whoops, mistake here, 1. So let's plot these points. I've got negative 1, 2, right here, and 0, 1. So notice, you can tell already this is going to have some different kind of shape here. So let's put in 1. All right, so this is 1/2 to the 1 power, which is just 1/2. So I have 1, 1/2. All right, let's do this. Let's put in negative 2. So this is 1/2 to the negative 2 power, which is 2 to the positive 2 power, which is 4. So we have the point negative 2, 4. Do you see what is happening here? It's got a shape like this. So it's actually, so if you look at the difference between the two, it kind of flips direction if b is a fraction between 0 and 1. It'll be in this direction if it's greater than 1, and in this direction if it is between 0 and 1. So now let's do the second part of this, all right? And that is 1/2 to the x power minus 2. And let's go back to the transformation. So minus 2 means shift the graph c units down. So let's go back and look at all the points we have graphed and shift them 2 down. So here, 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 and here. All right, so the one in blue is y equals 1/2 to the x power. And the one in red is y equals 1/2 to the x power minus 2. Now I will just tell you that what ends up happening if b is 1, let's go ahead and plot some points for that. So if I have y equals 1 to the x power, if x is -1, I've got 1 to the -1 power, which is 1. If x is 0, I've got 1 to the 0 power, which is 1. If x is 1, I've got 1 to the 1 power, which is 1. And if x is 2, I've got 1 to the 2 power, which is 1. And so what you will notice is that every point, the y value is 1. So it actually is going to look like this. It's just a straight line at y equals 1.